anything to eat, he called his disciples and said to them, I have compassion for the crowd because they have been with me now for 3 days and have nothing to eat. If I send them away hungry to their homes, they will faint on their way. And some of them have come from great distances. His disciples replied, how can one feed these people with bread here in the desert? He asked them, how many loaves do you have? They said, 7. Then he ordered the crowd to sit down on the ground, and he took the 7 loaves, and after giving thanks, he broke them, gave them to his disciples to distribute, and they distributed them to the crowd. They had also a few small fish, and after blessing them, he ordered that these too should be distributed. They ate and were filled, and they took up the broken pieces left over, 7 baskets full. Now, there were about 4,000 people, and he sent them away. And immediately he got into the boat and his disciples and went to the district of Dalmanutha. The Pharisees came and began to argue with him, asking him for a sign from heaven to test him. And he sighed deeply in his spirit and said, why does this generation ask for a sign? Truly I tell you, no sign will be given to this generation. And he left them, and getting into the boat again, he went across to the other side. Now the disciples had forgotten to bring any bread, and they had only 1 loaf with them in the boat. And he cautioned them, saying, watch out, beware of the yeast of the Pharisees and the yeast of Herod. They said to one another, it is because we have no bread. And becoming aware of it, Jesus said to them, why are you talking about having no bread? Do you still not perceive or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Do you have eyes and fail to see? Do you have ears and fail to hear? And do you not remember? When I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets full of broken pieces did you collect? They said to him, 12. And the 7 for the 4,000? How many baskets full of broken pieces did you collect? And they said to him, 7. Then he said to him, do you not yet understand? They came to Bethesda. Some people brought a blind man to him and begged him to touch him. He took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the village. And when he had put saliva on his hand and he laid his hand on him, he asked him, can you see anything? And the man looked up and said, I can see people, but they look like trees walking. Then Jesus laid his hand on his eyes again, and he looked intently, and his eyes and his sight was restored, and he saw everything what? Clearly. Then he said to them, then he sent him away to his home saying, do not even go into the village. Jesus went on with his disciples to the village of Caesarea Philippi. And on the way he asked his disciples, who do people say that I am? And they answered him, John the Baptist, and others say Elijah, and still others, one of the prophets. He asked them, but who do you say that I am? And Peter answered him, saying what? And he sternly ordered them not to tell anyone about him. Our scripture today is a little strange and a little complex and a little weird. It covers a lot of ground. The miracle of the blind man and the miracle of one of the feeding of thousands. I continued told the kids we're going to read about the 5,000 he fed, and instead it's the 4,000 in this story. The other story is the 5,000. But something incredible is happening here. This need to know, who do you say that I am? See, Jesus, even in our day, there are people who are still confusing him. They are not understanding who he is. Some people think he was just a decent fellow. For being such a friendly, affable guy, Jesus had a curious habit of declaring his divinity. His favorite self-designation was Son of Man, which infuriated the religious leaders because they knew exactly what he meant by this. Because in Daniel, in the Old Testament, it explains who the Son of Man is and said that he would come. His claims of divinity are not the claims of just a decent fellow. Jesus can't possibly be just a decent fellow. Then maybe he was a demented fool. I mean, maybe Jesus was just flat out a lunatic. When lunatics attract a following, they create other lunatics. Hitler created disciples of murderers. Stalin turned people into power addicts. Charles Manson turned people wacko. But Jesus made them better. People didn't just like Jesus, they loved him. They left their homes and their businesses to follow him. Impulsive behavior, impulsive people like Peter, studious people like Thomas, methodical people like Matthew, visionary people like Philip, prostitutes to philanthropists. From one extreme to another, he inspired people. They were the better for being with him. He took common netcasters and dock workers and turned them into the authority of history's greatest books and the founders of history's most incredible movements. Jesus, just a decent fellow? A demented fool? Maybe he's really just a deceiving fraud. If there had been no one to give testimony to the miracle of Christ, the early church would have died a still death. A fraud couldn't have pulled off all of those genuine miracles, and he couldn't have done those remarkable things with the love that he showed while doing them. Jesus came to the defense of the adulterous woman, and he forgave her. He befriended a shamed Samaritan woman, and she became a missionary to her own people. He befriends the swindler Zacchaeus, who becomes Jesus' disciple. Jesus, a decent fellow, a demented fool, a deceiving fraud, or a divine friend. Where does that leave us? Where does that leave us? Decent fellow? Decent fellows don't get by with claiming to be God. Demented fools? His teachings were lucid and his followers were devoted. A deceiving fraud. His followers were living proof that he was the real deal. Besides, if his intent was to trick people out of money and worship, he did a poor job because he died broke and alone. The conclusion I reach is the same as Peter's. Jesus, you are the Messiah. The Messiah is a divine friend. With that confession, the question changes. From what do we think of Christ to what does Christ think of us? If you believe of him as a divine friend, divine means a deity, a God. If you believe he is God and you are here gathered in this place because you believe with me that Jesus was a God. Now hold on, those of you that like to sleep when being read a bedtime story, the reading is over. See, the disciples are human form, human people talking about real problems. In our story today, we read about Jesus is talking about the yeast and how the Pharisees and the Sadducees are messing things up. And they're like this it takes this much yeast to make dough rise. An entire batch. It doesn't take hardly any. And they're messing things up. And the disciples, they're listening to what Jesus is saying, and they're saying, I'm hungry. Did you hear that in the story? Where's the bread? Jesus says, bread? You're talking about bread? Are you kidding me? You just watched me feed 4,000 people. And you're talking about bread now? See, you and me, we're human. And we have real fears. And we have real problems. And you know what? When I get hungry, I think about bread. It doesn't stop. But God says, wait. If you believe that I am Jesus, if you believe that I am the real Lord, the real King of Kings, there is more that you can do. There is more. And the question is, who do you say that I am? Oh God, I pray that you say He is the Messiah. This video, this week, this one, it was like the guy took his knife out of the sheath and he poked me right in my fear